Hello. All right, we're going to start with chapter 4. Share my screen. All right, so this chapter relates to our chapter 3 chapter. Chapter 3 was job order systems. And so job order costing, where every job we did was different. And chapter 4 is process costing. And so it's more of a manufacturing environment where we're making a bunch of like goods. So we are making goods like pop or crayons or whatever. Like we're making a bunch of different goods that are basically the same running through a process. And so it's called process costing rather than job order costing. So process costing is a single product produced on a continuous basis for long periods of time. And we're going to have different like departments that are going to do different things to it. So if we're making cars, we might have a department that's working on the frame and another department that's working on the engine, another department that's working on the interior, and another department that does exterior. So there's like multiple departments. So the first thing that we have here is that comparison. And then this is a multiple choice question. And so it says process costing is used for products that are. So go ahead and read this and see if you can come up with the answer. Hit pause. So different and produced continuously isn't quite right because we're going to make a bunch of stuff that all looks the same. So it will be, it looks like similar and produced continuously will be the answer. So individual units produced to customer specifications, that's what we did in a job order system. And purchased from vendors is not a manufacturer. That's a merchandising business. So in this chapter, to begin with, we're going to make potato chips. So what will happen is we'll start with basic raw materials, and that would be potatoes. And the first processing department, we're going to prepare them. So we might peel them, we might slice them, however we prepare the potatoes to get them ready to be chips instead. And so then we have a bunch of partially completed chips. They're not done yet. And the next department, we're going to cook them. We might bake them, we might fry them, probably fry them. That's the normal way. So that in this department, the process would be to cook them. So again, then we have some partially completed units. The potato chips are not done yet. Because in the next department, we might decide to season them. And so now they're all cooked. So maybe some of them will become salt and vinegar chips, and some will become cheddar and sour cream, and some will become whatever else, original or whatever. And then we're going to go ahead and put them in packages. And then we have finished goods. So the key here is instead of, so when we did chapter 3, go pull up chapter 3. I would think that it would be in my recent documents. Yeah. So when we did chapter 3, we had raw material, WIP, finished goods, COGS. Like that was what we had when we were in chapter 3. And so now what we're going to have is we're going to have raw material, which would be potatoes. But instead of one WIP, we're going to have raw material, WIP, finished goods, COGS. So we're going to have multiple WIP departments. And we're going to focus exclusively on the WIP account in this chapter. So we're going to look at the WIP account and how costs get in and out of it in different departments. What? Okay. So a processing department is any location where we're going to do something to the goods. So we're going to actually do something to make the goods different. So we are going to peel the potatoes and slice them, or we are going to bake them, or we are going to season them, or we are going to package them. So are performed. So the activities performed in a processing department are performed similarly on all goods of production. And so the output must be homogeneous, meaning that they, at the end, everything should be the same. So all of our chips are prepared, or all of our chips are seasoned, or all of our chips are baked. So we can't let any goods through without letting them be completed in there in the department before they move on to the next department. So when the goods come into the department, they'll come here, and before they can come out, they have to be done. Just 1 second.
So you're saying.
All right. So back to where we left off. Sequential versus parallel processing. Sequential means it has to be step to step. And so we are sequential while we are preparing and baking the chips. But once we get to the point of seasoning, we might have parallel processing where they might branch off and some of the chips might get seasoned with different flavors before they get to the finished goods. Okay. So here's a picture of what it looks like in chapter 3 in our previous chapter. So we would take direct material, direct labor, and overhead, and we would collect those and do WIP by individual jobs. So we would have individual job cost sheets for every individual job, and each job would have some material and some labor and some overhead. And as we completed individual jobs, we would send them to finished goods, and then we would send them to COGS. So we would go through the process of each job as we finished it with direct material, direct labor, and overhead applied. We would leave WIP and go to finished goods and leave finished goods and go to COGS. And so when we're doing it in this chapter, we're going to have goods that are partially completed in a bunch of different departments. But we're going to do WIP by processing departments. So process costing is a little bit different. One of the things that we're going to focus on is we're going to have our direct material separate from our direct labor and overhead. So direct material, direct labor, and overhead are the 3 product costs, the 3 manufacturing costs. So when you did your chapter 3 homework, you guys did the total manufacturing costs, which are material, labor, and overhead. But we learned in our very first chapter that labor and overhead combined are called conversion costs. This was back in our very first week. In this chapter, on the second page, we did direct material and direct labor combined, which were called prime costs. But this blank right here that you filled in when you guys did the first chapter was conversion costs. So direct labor and overhead combined are called conversion costs. So what happens is what we're going to keep track of in this chapter is we're going to lump together labor and overhead and call them conversion. So we're going to have materials coming into each department, and then we're going to convert them to get them ready to go to the next department. So in the chapter or in the department where we are baking potatoes, the material that would be involved, the potatoes would come from our previous department and they would be all like prepared, but then the material we would need is like maybe frying oil, things like that. And then we would need people to bake them, and we would need machines to be in the process of frying them and different things like that. So there would be supervisors involved, and that would be considered overhead. So that's what labor and overhead would include. So what we're going to focus on is equivalent units. And so an equivalent unit is the concept that if we have a bunch of partially completed units, that in total, they will have equivalency to them. The basic idea is 2 half-completed products are equivalent to 1 completed product. So if I have 2 units that are halfway done, then we'll have, that's considered 1 completed unit. So if 10,000 units are 60% complete, that's equivalent to 6,000 units. So 10,000 units that are 60% complete is equivalent to 6,000 completed units. So for example, if 200 units in ending inventory are 25% complete, then what would be the equivalent units? So the number of partially completed units are 200. Uh-oh, I need this to be black. Thought I fixed that. Okay. So 200 units that are partially completed that are 25% complete is the equivalent of 50 EUs. The very first time I taught this material, it was back like the very first time when I created this was way back in maybe 2004, 2005. When I uncovered it, like, you know, how it was black before, and I just like uncovered it, instead of EUs, it said FUs. And I was like, oh goodness, I don't know why it says that, like FU Friends University. So it was just a typo, but it was embarrassing. So, okay, for the current period, Jones started 15,000 units and completed 10,000 units, leaving 5,000 units in process that are 30% complete. How much are the equivalent units? So at this point, pause, and I want you to read this with these choices, and I want you to figure out what is the equivalent of the units that got completed this period. So hit pause. Okay, it's me again. So we started 15,000 units and we completed 10. So 10 are definitely done. So these units are definitely completed, but we also have 5,000 units that are 30% complete. So those are the important things that we need to consider. We completed 10,000 units and we completed 30% of 5,000. So that would be 1,500. So the answer would be 11,500 because 30% of the 5,000 is 1,500, and then 10,000 plus 1,500 is 11,500. So the answer here is B. So I think it was B last time too. Okay. So we have two different methods that we use to calculate these costs. And I'm going to show you guys like the way that I like to calculate it. It's very different than the way the textbooks do it, but I think it makes more sense because I'm going to use the T accounts rather than trying to do it as like a big table with a bunch of formulas. So the book the book that I used to try to use in this class, and I gave up on a book in general because I felt like I could make it simpler than the way a book approaches things. So there's two different methods. It's weighted average and FIFO. And students get super excited when I bring up FIFO because they remember FIFO from financial accounting, where we did FIFO, LIFO, and weighted average. And you guys loved FIFO, first in, first out. And you're like, yay, let's do that. Well, FIFO is actually really complicated in this system. So when you're doing process costing and you're using FIFO, you have to do like several extra calculations, and it's not worth it. So you don't necessarily need to do the FIFO method. So what we do instead is we just use weighted average. So don't worry, those of you that are accounting majors, you're going to use FIFO. You're going to learn that method when we get to cost accounting. So in cost accounting, which is the advanced to this course, you'll get to learn the FIFO method. So don't worry, accounting majors, you get it. But for the non-accounting majors, weighted average is enough. And so the weighted average method is a little bit simpler. So the first thing we're going to focus on with our weighted average method is the so one of the formulas that your book asks you to look at is cost per equivalent unit. This is the formula we'll use when we start doing our calculations. And so cost per means divide. So you just take costs divided by the EUs, and that will give you the cost per EU. So another thing, like this is the way the book presents it, and it's looking at like total cost to be accounted for, beginning cost and cost incurred, and then EUs are transferred out plus whatever's an ending WIP. And these are 100% done. And then we'll look at the percentage completion there. And then we have cost per EU, cost transferred out, cost of ending WIP. And there's all these formulas. You don't need to memorize any of them. I'm presenting them to you just to show you how the book actually tries to set this up, but it's not my preferred method. So what I'm going to start with on this page and all of the remaining pages is to set up how this works. And we're going to do cost per EUs, and we're going to like go through and we're going to calculate all of this. So we have an example here, another example, another example, and another example. And then you'll have 3 tabs of homework, which are going to be just like the ones that are in the notes. So everything should go very well. So let's start with this first one. And on this first one, all we're going to do is we're going to calculate EUs. So all we're trying to do is compute EUs. Now we computed EUs in a multiple choice question. And so where we got 11,500, and it's the basic idea, but I'm going to set up every single one of these problems exactly the same. So every time I set up a problem, I'm going to put them in the same place on my sheet, and I'm going to move around in a circle. And I want you to try to do the same thing, because if you set them up differently, it'll be easy to miss a step. Because on the next problem, you'll see that we're actually going to have 4 things we have to solve for, and I don't want you to miss anything along the way. So what we're going to start with is we're going to draw a T account and do WIP in units. And so if I were you and you have like blank paper, like you're handwriting it, then you're fine. If you're doing it like on the computer and filling in with me, you might want to grab a sheet of paper and just draw these. I'm going to do it in Excel because I need to be able to do it in Excel. Normally I do it on a chalkboard at school. It's not chalk, it's a whiteboard, but whatever. So I do it on a board at school, and you guys follow along with me. But since we're on the computer, we have to do it on the computer. So let's go ahead. And I'm just going to go to a blank Excel document. And I'm going to first, let's see, remove the grid lines so that it's just a nice blank sheet of paper. Okay, so this is what we have. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw WIP account in units. And so I'm starting here on the paper, and then I'm going to move in a circle around here. So everybody watch my cursor for a second. Right now I've got a fat plus Oh God, okay, there we go. Okay, so I'm gonna draw WIP account in units right here, and then I'm gonna compute EUs and then cost per EU and then WIP in dollars. And so I'm gonna make a circle counterclockwise, starting up here in the top left, moving in a circle. So on your sheet of paper, I will start here and then move in a circle. So on this one, I don't have to do the move in a circle because I only have to do the very first step. So I don't need a lot of room. But when we get here, you'll notice you have a big giant space, and I'm gonna start right here and move in a circle. Okay. So I'm going to do this first one, and I'm going to come over here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to draw WIP account in units. So I'm going to merge two cells. I'm going to write WIP in units and draw a T account. Okay. So when I'm drawing a T account, I merge two cells, and then I give it a bottom border, and then I highlight those cells and give it a right border. So now I have a nice T. Okay. So what will happen is this is a WIP account, but it is not in dollars. It's in units. So let's flip back to my data, and I have the number of units given to me. So they're all in a nice column here. I can probably make this small so I can see the information. Okay. So I'm going to be writing this right here on your piece of paper. Okay. So I'm going to start with 300 units. That's the beginning inventory. And then units started in production in June is 6,000, and then completed and transferred out. So I want you to keep in mind that when I used to teach this material, I wasn't allowed to use debits and credits. And so I just call them ins and outs, and it still works to do that. When goods come in, they come into the WIP account, and when they go out, they come out of the T account. Okay. And then our ending balance will be over on the debit side. Okay. But I didn't have to use the word debit and credit because really we're just talking about ins and outs. So I started with 300, and then I brought in an additional, I started in to production 6. And I'm going to draw a line across because the units that come out, units completed and transferred out, are 5,400. So I'm going to end with 900 units. Now it told me that I'm ending with 900, but even if I didn't know that, I could figure it out because 306,000 is 6,300 minus 5,400 is 900. So at this point, then these 900 units, and I'm actually going to shift this over so that I can have a little bit of room. Okay. So I moved it over a little bit for myself. So I just shifted it over a column. And then these 900 units, this is my ending inventory, so I'm going to double underline it. So everybody okay with the WIP account in units? Because now what I have is I have a bunch more information. So I have some percentages for beginning, and I have some percentages for ending. And so what I'll tell you guys is that you will never need your beginning percentages. I give them to you on each question just so you can sort through the data. But what we're suggesting here are these 300 units. When we started, those units were 40% complete for material and 20% complete for conversion. And so we only need these percentages when we're using FIFO, because first items into the first ones to go, and we have to look at those first units separately and do calculations with them. So you will not need those percentages. So you can cross them out or just X through them, or you just know that you're going to ignore the beginning percentages. But on the ending percentages, we do need these numbers. And what we're suggesting here is these 900 units have 60% of their needed material to be complete. So if it's a bicycle, maybe it would have a frame and some handlebars and some, the seat is all done, but maybe it doesn't have the pedals and gears yet. So it's 60% complete, okay? And then for conversion, it's 30% complete. So what that means is it's 30% done in the process before it can move to the next process. So students get very agitated about this situation because they think that the total of these should equal 100%. Because anytime they see 2% next to each other, they just assume it should equal 100. But that's not the case at all. We do not need this to equal 100%. And it could be 10 and 10. It could be 140. It doesn't matter. What we're saying here is how complete are we with our materials, and then how far along on, like, you can think of it as like a conveyor belt of all the goods. And so if we're making a bicycle at the beginning of the conveyor belt, they can dump everything you need on the belt. And then the belt is moving along through the system and you're doing things to it while it moves along. So if they dump all of your needed materials on the belt, then that means it's 100% complete for material. It has all of its material. But then if it's moving on the belt and it's only like halfway through, and so one person is attaching the seat to the frame and one person is attaching the handlebars and one person comes in and they start working on the pedals and the gears. And then at the end, somebody's painting it and then it's finished. So when you're looking at that, it depends on how far along on the conveyor belt the goods are. So that's what the 30% is. So these 900 items are 30% complete. So what I'm telling you is that these 2% do not have to equal 100. They could be 90% and 90%, and I'm completely okay with that. Okay. So what we do with it, what we do with it, I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need this anymore, is we're going to branch off of our 900 and we're going to use the 60 and 30%. So I'm going to make this big so I can mess with it. So off of the 900, I'm going to draw 2 arrows. I'm going to branch off of the 900. So I'm going to go to the insert tab and I'm going to use the shapes and I'm going to pick an arrow. So it's under lines if you've never used any shapes, and it's an arrow, and I'm going to draw an arrow off of the 900 and then I'm going to draw another arrow off of the 900. Okay. So for material, I have a different percentage than I do for conversion. So for material, I am 60% complete. And I'm going to move that to the left so it lines up nicer. Okay. And for conversion, I am 30% complete. Okay. So then 60% of 900, 60% of 900 is what, 540? And 30% of 900 is 270. Okay. So this is the number based on 900 at 60% and 900 at 30%, the percent of the equivalent units in our ending inventory. So the next step, we have this, and the next step is we move over to the right. Because remember what's going to happen is I'm going to start and then I'm going to move in a circle. I'm going to do stuff here and here, and then eventually down here. Okay. We're going to move in a big circle. So these are called my EUs. So to do my EUs, I'm going to have different EUs for material versus conversion. So for materials, remember, this is where you get your 11.5. Remember when we did that multiple choice question? I come over there and I'm going to remind you of it. So remember when we did that multiple choice question? Oh, it was here. And we said, we definitely finished 10,000 units. And we also finished 30% of the 5,000. So same idea here. So we definitely finished the units that are transferred out. So that 5,400. So we finished 5,400. We definitely finished 5,400 for material and conversion. And for material, we also finished 540. And for conversion, we finished 270. So in total, my EUs for material, I'm going to keep them separate. For material, I have 5,940. And for conversion, I have 5,670. And this is my answer for EUs. It really wants to make the U little. And the only way I figured out to make it not be little is to put a space in. So the EUs are 5,940 for material and 5,670 for conversion. The students get overwhelmed by this because the 5,400 is duplicated in both. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here and I'm going to do my costs separately, and then it'll all work out. So this is the answer for the question on page 4. So I'm going to go ahead and screenshot it. And put it right here. And I'll make it small enough that I don't have to worry about. Okay. So that's it for this problem, because this problem only wanted you to compute EUs. Now the next problem, I'm going to have to go on to the next step. So I think this seems like a good pausing place. And then I'm going to do the remaining 3 problems on a separate video. So I'll stop here.